So we're gonna try to get started where we left off, and obviously we're working with about half the time we had allotted. So I don't think we're gonna get to many of our questions that. But if you do have questions, please do submit them in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to stay on a little bit longer. I know Ben has to leave at 10 minutes after, so we won't be able to stay on too long. But Hueda, do you think we could pick up where we left off and just start again? I'll ask the question again, just so that everybody knows where we're at. But basically, the question was, we tend to paint public opinion with very broad strokes. It's a very imperfect science. When in reality, the polls we rely on only show part of the story. So 3 months into what has become a clear genocide in Gaza, and calls for ceasefire are definitely growing every day. That's what pretty much all polls are telling us. Yet at the same time, lawmakers have by and large refused to budge. So since you're both joining us from different places, Ben and Hueda, I wanted to start with you, Hueda. If you could give us a breakdown and some background into where exactly the U.S. public stands at this point when it comes to Israel's assault, and what the gap between public policy, public opinion, and actual policy really looks like. Wait, I think you need to unmute. Yeah.
Yep, it wasn't letting me unmute. Good morning, everyone. Yes, let me try to truncate my response. We see the thousands and hundreds of thousands in the streets. Just this past weekend, we had estimated 400,000 this past Saturday, and still massive marches across the United States. We know that those in the administration and members of Congress are getting disrupted wherever they go for calls of ceasefire. Hundreds and thousands of calls are being made to the White House and to members of Congress every single day. And it's not only the people in these actions and the marches in the streets, but the actual coalitions and organizations across the country that are working on various social justice issues, from our Black brothers and sisters, Latino, Indigenous, all across the religious spectrum. These organizations representing these groups are all on board calling for a ceasefire. Some of you may remember a couple of months ago, there was an article in HuffPost saying that quoting Democratic congressional staffers, specifically saying we are inundated. Members of Congress are caught by surprise in terms of the fervor for the call for a ceasefire, and also saying that they've never seen such a disconnect between what actual constituents are calling for and where their member of Congress is. That said, Congress has moved a lot as a result of this pressure. When it started, a few months ago, when the ceasefire resolution was introduced, there were 13 members of Congress signed on. Now we have about 64 signed on and 4 members of the Senate. And I think you have to also include Bernie Sanders, although he's not officially included. And I think that'll continue to grow as we continue our work. But the administration has not budged, and that has taken, I think, a lot of people by surprise. Not that we didn't know that Biden was a self-proclaimed Zionist and some of the things that he said before, but we didn't realize the extent of it and the extent that he's willing to go to put U.S. credibility and even his own reelection chances on the line to, unconditionally back Israel and this genocidal assault on Gaza and on all of Palestine. So a huge disconnect, but the work that people are doing every single day are certainly moving members of Congress, waking people up. And what the administration will do, I mean, they've certainly surprised us, but we got to keep the pressure on. Maybe if we have time, we'll get into some of the reasoning into why Biden and his administrations are taking the positions that they are.
Thanks, Hueda. And Ben, do you want to give us some background on what it's looking like from the UK perspective?
Yeah, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good in every sense to connect with you. I mean, a very, very similar picture. I think, first of all, in terms of the reliable measures we have of public opinion, I think Tarek, you quoted earlier figures in the US of 68% broad public support. We got similar, slightly more in the UK. So the most reliable opinion polls have said 76% support the fundamental and basic call for a permanent ceasefire. The other measures of public opinion which are not insignificant. Obviously, those that march are always a small proportion of the public, but what we're seeing at the moment in the UK, we've now, alongside days of action, which see actions taking place in towns and cities across the UK, we've held 7 now national marches in London, and the numbers of people attending those are unprecedented in size. We had 800 to 1 million on the largest, but 2 or 3 that have had at least 500,000 in attendance. And the largest march, to put that into context, the largest march in British political history on any issue was the Iraq War demonstration. So these are, which had over 1 million people marching. But all of these marches, are in the top 10 to 20 attended marches on any issue in British political history. And so they are indicative. I think the measure always is when people march, multiply that manifold with those who care or are energized by an issue. And we're also seeing, not quite in terms of, I think, the range of disruptive actions, as some that have happened in the States, but similar things. We're seeing other outpourings of solidarity. We've seen occupations of train stations. I talked about national days of action where we asked people to demonstrate in towns and cities, and what we've seen there is hundreds, and in some cases thousands of people turning out in very, very small towns in the UK marching. We've seen school children marching out of their schools to protest. So these significant sort of outpouring of solidarity. Other measures that we undertake regular e-actions, so digital lobbying of parliamentarians. Our normal measure when we send out to our base to ask them to take part in an action, a good response is about 10,000 people responding. When there was a vote on a ceasefire some weeks before Christmas, in the week before, and there were a number of organizations simultaneously doing the same thing, but from PSC's action, we had over 350,000 people emailing their MPs, and the feedback we got is MPs had never experienced such a deluge of lobbying on a single issue, but exactly the same dynamic. And here, as in the States, we have both our major parties really unyielding in their support, but again, evidence of some succumbing. At the moment, only rhetorical, but the rhetoric certainly of the Labour Party is starting to shift. They are feeling the pressure. There is certainly a dynamic. We have an election. I know we'll touch on this. We have an election pending, and people are starting to be conscious of some very important seats and how this might resonate. But still, no fundamental shift in the decision-making of our leaders. That's the disconnect, which is part of what's fueling people to come to the streets, the absolute sense of outrage. And I think this reached a peak last week. Nobody marching needed convincing. We didn't need the case to go to the ICJ to know that this is a genocide. We've seen it being live streamed across our screens for weeks. But I think actually the forensic detail and the shocking statistics that were presented and laid before the court, one stuck with me: 10 children a day in Gaza having one or both legs amputated without anesthetic. When people see that, and they still see in these circumstances a complete failure to act on the part of our political leaders, that is fueling a real sense of rage, which is sustaining these marches. We are now several months in, and we're still bringing 400,000 people plus to the streets.
Thanks, Ben. I'm glad you touched on elections, because that's my next question. Maybe we can start with Hueda again. Election year is kind of well underway in the US, at least on the Republican side. They've just had their primary. in Iowa. And we've seen poll after poll showing President Biden's approval rating crater and poor performances against Trump, who is probably going to be the Republican nominee. And so while there are obviously, a lot bigger domestic factors that influence those numbers, many have argued that Biden's unconditional support for Israel is causing him to lose support from Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, people of color, and many, many progressives, which are all, very important communities that Biden needs under his, wider umbrella to win this election. But others have pointed out that, the political costs of failing to be seen as Israel's biggest supporter, biggest allies, and running afoul of the pro-Israel lobby could be more costly than losing these other areas of support. So I kind of wanted to get a better understanding of what exactly, to what extent do you think the Biden administration's strategy over the last 3 months will play out among voters when it comes to Election Day?
Oh, I think it is going to have a big impact. One of the groups that I neglected to mention as I was trying to speak quickly to make up some time is we have hundreds of unions across the United States, national unions, who have joined the call for a ceasefire. And these are unions represent millions of Americans. And when they join these calls and they communicate to their members also, this goes a long way in alerting people that might not otherwise be directly interested or invested in terms of what is happening, the importance of what's happening. When it comes specifically to Biden's chance at reelection, we have, since Israel's genocidal assault in October, specifically called on the administration to call for a ceasefire and repeatedly said, if there isn't a call for a ceasefire, if there isn't a reining in of Israel, then Biden cannot expect Palestinians for sure, Arabs, Muslims, and many others to vote for him. And those calls have gone unheeded. And there is now an active campaign amongst Muslim and Arab Americans to abandon Biden, and a pledge to actually work against his reelection by educating and mobilizing not only Muslim and Arab voters, but other kind of young voters across the political spectrum. And when you take into consideration, actually, even if we're just going to look at Arab, Muslim, Palestinian votes, our votes are concentrated in key swing states that Biden has to win. And I am from Michigan, and that is a big one. And support for Biden and Democrats in Michigan amongst the Arab and Muslim community has plummeted. And there was a recent poll done just last week, didn't necessarily highlight the Arab Muslim vote, but Biden is in trouble in Michigan. He is behind Trump by 8 points. And of all who were polled, only 17% said Biden deserved a second term. So that the pollster himself was quoted as saying, if I was a Democrat in Michigan, I would be pulling the fire alarms and asking what the Democrat strategy is in Michigan, because Biden needs to win Michigan. And yet we have nothing. In fact, on Sunday, when we marked 100 days of this genocide in Gaza, the statement from the White House was abhorrent, did not even mention Palestinians, focused only on hostages, Israeli hostages, no mention whatsoever of the carnage in Gaza or Palestinian lives. And that has been indicative of what we've been seeing from this administration from the beginning, refusing to actually meet with representatives of the Arab American, Palestinian American communities, even though Palestinian Americans, hundreds, were stuck in Gaza. Palestinian Americans have lost family by the dozens in Gaza, and yet no outreach, and not only no outreach, but rejecting requests for meeting with this administration. And so such callous disregard for the humanity. Basically, you're telling Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, people that you want to vote for you, that you don't consider Palestinians lives to be as worthy, if worthy at all, of your consideration, and that has infuriated our community, but it goes beyond our community. Young voters, a lot of African American and Latino voters are also, it's being reported, are very unhappy with Biden. And when you take into consideration what he has been able to achieve, what he has promised and what he has been able to achieve, it's very, he doesn't really have much to kind of campaign on and to try to win our votes. And his strategy right now of his re-election campaign seems to be Trump will be worse. They're trying to scare us that Trump will be worse. And, you know, you don't want that. And if that's all he has to offer, when we see that he has green lighted, endorsed, enabled, financed the genocide of the Palestinian people, that ain't going to do it. It seems that, and messages that we've heard from political pundits and strategists, is that they expect the community to forget and to realize that Trump will be much worse, and then to just plug their nose and vote for Biden. And that is not going to happen. Certainly, Trump is horrible. Many of us do not want to see Trump in power, but we cannot also vote for someone who green-lighted and participated in the genocide of our people. And I saw a comment, of course, the Jewish Americans, Jewish Voice for Peace, young Jewish activists, of course, also saying similar things in terms of not being able to vote for Biden. Another thing, and I'll end there, is last week it came out that Biden was planning a visit to Michigan to court the Arab American vote. And we expect that he'll probably announce soon some scheduling conflict, because no one here is willing to meet with him. No one's willing to sit down and meet with him. And if for some reason he came, I think the community here would give him an appropriate reception, because never did we expect such callous disregard and absolute endorsing of the slaughter of so many people on this scale. Sorry, and let me add, I think before I focused on Michigan, but there are obviously other states that Biden has to win, where this campaign to abandon Biden is spreading or is organized. We have in Virginia, in Georgia, Michigan is a big one. These states he needs to win, and if he doesn't lose, it's such a close race that he needs the Arab American and Muslim vote. But on top of that, all of the others who have pledged not to vote for him, he's in real trouble. And the problem, I think, right now is, even if he changed course, I think it might be too late. So when you compare that to, okay, so now what incentive does he have to change course? That becomes an issue. And last thing, you talked about I think historically, yes, the power of the pro-Israel vote, the pro-Israel lobby, has been huge. But one of the effects, or one of the ways they've been able to be so effective, is the large amount of money that they pour into campaigns. And Biden, in a sense, comes from that background, comes from that experience, because of his long, decades in the Senate. He is used to the power of the pro-Israel lobby dictating elections. I think he has been unable to kind of see the sea change, and the money and AIPAC has vowed to spend up to $100 million, for example, just in challenging the progressive members of Congress like Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, and others that are seen as being, anti-Zionist or anti-Israel. And that, when you take an actual hard look at it, yes, all of their money may be intimidating, but in the end, the money is needed to win votes. And when you have the votes of the people, because we can reach the people in other ways with the truth, it is all the money that AIPAC has is not going to defeat the power of the truth. And we can do that. Certainly, unfortunately, in the US election system, money seems to dominate, but with the mobilizing that we've been able to see to kind of counter that big money, and the recognition that big money is a problem in our political system, I don't think that that will get them as far as it used to. And the last thing I'll end with is when I ran, one of the things that both Democrats and Republicans agreed with me on is that you need to get big money out of politics because it works to manipulate our system and actually make it less democratic. And what Biden is also not seeing, and we've been harping on for a long time, is that specifically Democrats, his policy, the administration's policy, the entrenched kind of Democrat, they are really out of touch with the base and where the people are moving. And just in a poll that I conducted in my district, which is in Macomb County, which is looked at, it's the home of the traditional Reagan Democrats, looked at as being a bellwether for how kind of the country is in middle America. And it specifically asked that, you know, if my policy was to cut aid to Israel because of its human rights abuses, et cetera, what kind of reason is that for voting for me? Very strong, strong, or not strong at all? 67% said it was strong or very strong reason to vote for me. And I think that that gives you an indication of where the people are, and the Democratic establishment is way out of touch.
Thanks, Huida. I want to actually stick with you for one more moment. If you could just tell us a little bit more about those forces that are actually pushing Biden towards his stance. I mean, you mentioned that, of course, you know, the pro-Israel lobby has a lot of influence on his decision making and considering especially his long career in U.S. politics. But I also do want to recognize, you know, a lot of his comments, his very deeply pro-Israel, pro-Zionist comments, and so what could you tell us a little bit more about this balance? How much of it is the political game essentially that he's playing, and how much of it is his actually what seems on its face, at least in terms of his statements, this deep infatuation with Zionism as a political philosophy?
Just kind of briefly, because I don't know for sure, but certainly this stance and has kind of surprised a lot of people because it doesn't seem to make sense. It is the extent of it because of where public sentiment is, both in the streets, in terms of what we're calling for, in terms of what polls are showing. Actually, a recent poll showed that 2-to-1, the people polled 1,000 likely voters, Democrats and Republicans, 2-to-1 said that they are more likely to vote for a candidate who supports a ceasefire than one who does not. Yet Biden's stance remains the same. And so what we've heard, and actually in late December, an article came out in Mother Jones kind of detailing the extensive Zionist-like indoctrination of Biden over the years from his career. And it talks about some of the people who have shaped his political perceptions towards Israel, so that it is a deeply personal one. And he also surrounds himself with kind of like an echo chamber of people who agree with him. And so I think he stays in that mindset, and those who are the issues that we see with the problems his campaign that this is going to cause, you have strategists and advisors telling him that we are going to forget, people are going to forget in due time. So it's that kind of combination, which I think is to account for this absolutely inhumane and politically unsound position that he has taken.
Thanks, Huida. Ben, I want to jump back to you. Can you? I mean, it's also approaching election season in the UK, just coming right around the corner. So, to what extent do you think the current Conservative government's strategy over the last three or so months is going to play out amongst voters, and do you think it's going to be a factor at all? How do you think that compares to the situation we're seeing here in the US?
I mean, there's a lot of what Huida says that sort of resonates. Some very similar dynamics. Some distinct factors. You know, that are specific to the UK. I mean, one thing I'll say in relation to the Conservative government position. And you know, if there's one aspect of your question to what extent will it affect their chances of being re-elected, the reality at the moment, it is hugely unlikely that the Conservatives can recover from their current position. They're about 20% behind in the opinion polls. What's happened since October and their positioning on that has not altered that opinion poll rating at all. And that's a whole host of factors, largely a sense of complete economic incompetence, the corruption of the Johnson administration across a whole range of measures has completely removed any credibility. So in that sense, I don't think it would affect. The more interesting thing, I think, is in relation to what extent will this impact on the likelihood of a significant Labour victory, and without getting dragged too much into the sort of specifics of the vote system, etc. But to win the election, even from this position, Labour has to have quite a historically high swing. Now, part of the problem for us is this, and I think part of what the Labour Party is relying on, because I think it knows that its current position is out of sync with public opinion. It also knows that in some very significant seats, and not solely, but significantly, those with a significant Muslim community, and there are a number of marginal seats that will be crucial to the sort of outcome of the election. There's undoubtedly a calculation on the part of the Labour Party. This resonates with a little bit of what Huwaida says, that, well, these people have nowhere else to go. And why would they vote Conservative if that's the only viable alternative when the Labour position is really not distinct from the Conservative position? And that calculation is also based on something that has some truth in it, which is because of the nature of our electoral system, historically, it's incredibly hard for third parties or for minor or new parties to make any inroads on a sort of national scale. But it is also true that individual candidates in particular seats, there can be some impact on the outcome of the vote in those seats. And we are seeing some indications of that resonating. I'm very conscious, one of the Labour MPs who has spoken out in favour of a ceasefire, it's a name that will mean something to UK-based viewers of this, not to those outside the UK. A woman called Jess Phillips is not a natural ally of ours. She's never campaigned on this issue. She was particularly bad when the narratives under the Corbyn administration of anti-Semitism were in flow. She was one of the voices at the forefront of using that stick to undermine the Corbyn administration. But she recently voted for a ceasefire. She voted against the Labour government position. I know for a fact, because I had it fed back to me, who someone was in the room when it was said. She was electioneering in a by-election for a candidate in an adjoining seat to hers, and said to that candidate, if you win, which you will, I will not come for the photo shoot because Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, will turn up and I cannot be photographed anywhere near him. Why? Because of the demographic of her constituency and the strong Muslim community representation in her seat. And she knows she's got a marginal seat. She's extremely worried that her position, if she did not vote for a ceasefire, would materially affect her chances of re-election. We are starting to see emerge, and how this will play out, we'll have to see. But independent candidates are starting to be nominated to stand in certain seats. We've just had this week a quite prominent young British Palestinian who's standing against a prominent Labour politician. The person who, if Labour win, would be the health secretary, who has adopted very pro-Israel positions historically and in the current moment. He is vulnerable in his seat. Again, there's a large Muslim constituency. So these things are starting to resonate. We saw one measure of this recently. one of the things the government is currently doing, so beyond the grotesqueness of its position in terms of its complicity, it's not being silent about what Israel's doing, it's green lighting genocide. It's refusing even to accept there are any violations of international law. It may still potentially intervene in a negative way in the ICJ court. We don't know how that's going to pan out, but it's certainly not going to be supportive, and it's tried to be extremely dismissive of that. But alongside that, at this moment, it has brought back to the House an anti-boycott bill. A part of, you will be very familiar across wherever people are listening to this, they'll know the strategy as part of trying to delegitimize activism for Palestine, of bringing in motions to or bills to prescribe support for boycott in various ways. The government has brought that back. The natural Labour Party position, and maybe I think we'll come on to discuss what's motivating the Labour Party for its position. One of the factors is what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, the narratives of anti-Semitism, and Keir Starmer, at the point of election, made it, as leader of the Labour Party, made it very clear that he saw this as a significant electoral factor. He was wrong about that, I think, but he had to deal with those narratives, and he was very easily persuaded that the indicator of his real desire to deal with anti-Semitism were the positions he adopted in relation to Israel. So an absolute conflation of anti-Semitism and any action to hold Israel to account for its violations of Palestinian rights. There are some who think he's ideologically wedded to that. I've just listened to what Huwaida said about her assessment of Joe Biden. My assessment of Keir Starmer is not. This is not based on ideology. He's described himself as a Zionist without qualification, but I don't think he means it. I know before he got elected as an MP, when he was standing for election, he used to come and attend and speak at meetings of our local branch. And I know the positions he held then. He has been persuaded, wrongly, that this is crucial to his election. But on the anti-boycott bill, his natural position would have been to oppose that, because it would have been seen as a benchmark of, are you serious about anti-Semitism? And actually the Labour Party reluctantly now is opposing that bill. And that's because we've been able to build a very, very broad coalition, and it's become an issue with significant public support in opposition to that bill. So I think that's the question. There are, and maybe we'll come back to this, there are still a huge amount of forces compelling the Labour Party position. As I said, anti-Semitism is one of them. Another is a view that the only credible position, if you want to appear statesmanlike, is to have an Atlanticist position where you support the US position on any foreign policy issue. We've seen another indicator of that. This week, the UK has joined Israel uniquely in taking action in relation to the Houthis. The Labour Party rushed to support the government position, even though the government had not actually brought it for a vote to the House of Commons. Keir Starmer's position was it would have been better if you'd done that, but I unreservedly support the position. So it's not affecting at the moment what they're doing in terms of the policy positions, but undoubtedly there are now voices around Keir Starmer saying we need to be careful here. There is a potential electoral cost we may pay in certain crucial seats if we maintain this position.
Thanks, Ben. So we're over our allotted time for this event, but we have a couple more minutes. Our speakers said that they're able to stick with us a couple more minutes to discuss just one more question I had, which is, I think, the most important question around, how do we actually bridge this gap between public opinion and policy? How do we convince lawmakers to call for a ceasefire, which is, a bare minimum demand, and enact policies that actually better reflect these voter concerns? Ben, I know you have a hard stop soon, so maybe you could just give us a quick response, and then Huwaida, we can move on to you.
Yeah, look, and the simple answer I would give, but it needs a little bit of elaboration, is we continue to maximize and use every lever of power we have to make politicians aware that they are not representing the people with the positions that they're holding, and that there is a potential cost to pay. And I think that requires a whole range of actions. In terms of our strategy at the moment, we're not naive. We know that marches by themselves are not enough to change the direction of decision making. Anybody who ever thought that and who marched 1 to 2 million strong against the Iraq war in 2003 will have learnt the lesson that it doesn't matter if you can mobilize that many. It's not in itself enough to immediately change the direction of decision making if there are other powerful forces, like the view that you must always stick close to the US position on foreign policy issues and all of the factors that sustain pro-Israel positions, whilst those continue. But we need to continue. Our strategy is to continue these marches because they are a point of pressure alongside, and I never underestimate this, the important message they give to the Palestinian people that whatever you see from the position of our leadership, there are people of conscience around the world who stand with you in huge numbers. And every time we march, I get messages from my comrades in Palestine that say very simply, we see you, we hear you, we see what you're doing. But they're not alone. We have to keep up the lobbying pressure. It's really important that we continue to have, as I said, hundreds of thousands of people at the moment who are applying, who are responding to our request for people to petition and email their MPs. But I'm also persuaded by the need for a wider range of actions. We have sustained BDS campaigns, and part of our narrative at the moment to those who are joining us at the moment and coming new to this issue because of their horror at what they're seeing is to involve them in sustained activism. And we're seeing that our base of people we speak to just through those that subscribe to receive regular calls for action from PSC before October was 75,000 people. It's now over 250,000 people. We went into October with 80 branches. We're now on the way to forming over 100 branches across the country. And that means there are people in communities over 100 towns and cities across the UK who are geared to take action and sustained action in support of BDS campaigns. But the area I was going to touch on that Hueda touched on, I do think it's important that in this particular moment, specifically, for us to look at other forms of disruptive action. We have to make it clear to our leaders through actions, forms of direct action that are strategic and sustainable, that actually this cannot be business as usual. And I'm talking about actions like the protests, but I think occupations of MPs' offices are legitimate at the moment. Those type of disruptive actions that can get maximum engagement, that are strategic and are not going to be done in a way that's going to actually lead to a desertion of public opinion, but are going to help to galvanize public opinion. I think we need to use all levers of pressure in order to make it clear that there is this fundamental disconnect and that there is going to be a consequence for that. And the final bit as we go into the election season is how we actually start to mobilize very specific action in the key constituencies, that we work with some of the key organizations that can mobilize in those constituencies alongside the work that we can do with our branches to actually bring those people standing for election into meetings to say your position on Palestine matters. There was an opinion poll done in May where people were asked what issues matter to you. 27% of people said, as it was framed, the question, Israel-Palestine was an issue that mattered to them. Now, that's a baseline. It matters to me. Is that going to indicate and dictate my vote? That's a separate question. But all of that at the moment is being magnified because of people's horror at what they're seeing. And actually that reaction, as I say, that even in the midst of what is transparently a genocide, still our leaders are prepared to greenlight Israel and refuse to hold it to account. And I think that's magnifying the extent to which this is an issue that resonates and will matter. And that's particularly true. It's not just a Muslim community issue. It is particularly true of young people as well. And that's one of the dynamics of our marches. Significant numbers of young people attending who are taking other forms of actions. We've got people marching out of their schools in large numbers to go and attend protests. So all of these forms of pressure done strategically, done in a way that's, you know, our task here is to build a really big and broad alliance of pressure. All of those have an important part to play.
Thank you, Ben. Hueda, do you wanna close us off with your thoughts on the US perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Ben said. I think that we have to keep on doing what we're doing and recognize that we are making a change. As I think I remember to say earlier, when the ceasefire resolution was originally introduced, we had 13 sponsors. Now we're up to 64, and that is a direct result of the public pressure that has been put on these members of Congress. In addition to that, people are taking ceasefire resolutions to their communities, to their school boards, to their city councils. In Michigan, we passed in just the other day in Ann Arbor, we passed it in Detroit, in Dearborn, Hamtramck, over a half dozen cities, and at the county level. Just last week, I passed not only a ceasefire resolution in my local Democratic club, but also a call to suspend aid to Israel. And as much as we increase these, they grow, especially if we are in these political clubs that make these statements and pass these resolutions. That goes up. That can go up to the county, the state level, and send this administration a very strong message. The Democratic club that I was a part of, I mean, it is in, again, Macomb County, which is not a progressive county at all. And it was a strongly worded resolution that called what Israel is doing genocide and called to cut off aid to Israel, and it passed unanimously. So we keep doing that. We keep calling every day, and there are apps and there are scripts to help people, and it only takes a few minutes a day. If anyone on here doesn't know, there's an app called 5 Calls app. You can refer to the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights or Jewish Voice for Peace. They have wonderful toolkits to also help you. These calls matter. And as Ben talked about, at all different levels, things are being done. And of course, people are facing repercussions, but also we're not leaving people alone. I know I am a human rights and a civil rights attorney, and myself and hundreds of others around the country have volunteered to help organizations like Palestine Legal to represent people that face repercussions for their stance on Palestine. So this kind of the actions, the importance of it is growing. And as we do these things, I mean, it's calling for a ceasefire now, but it's much broader than that, right? I mean, ceasefire is the bare minimum to protect lives, unimpeded access to aid, to protect lives. But while we're doing that, we're also educating that the root cause of all of this needs to be addressed, and that's Israel's decades-long settler colonial domination, settler colonial project that has destroyed Palestinian life. So that kind of education needs to continue. So I guess a long way of saying that the mobilization is historic. The coalition building is also great, and it's growing. So let's not get discouraged, because we don't have the luxury of getting discouraged. And as Ben said, really, Palestinians are relying on us when their voices are muted, and Israel's cutting they're doing their job, kind of live streaming their own genocide and destruction, but in the hopes that we take that and we do all we can to move people. So we keep on. And please, if anyone here listening is not calling the representative and the White House every day, please do. It helps. Whether we shift Biden specifically, I don't know. I actually suspect, he does want a ceasefire soon. He does want, because of his political campaign, re-election campaign and everything else, but he is not going to come out outright and contradict Israel, which is shameful, and it really harms kind of the U.S. standing in many ways. But we are moving members of Congress, and we are doing, in the actions that we are doing, educating those around us that need to be more educated in order to continue the work, not just for a ceasefire, but for Palestinian liberation.
Thank you, Hueda. I think that's a really good note to end this on. I mean, we're already way over time because of those technical difficulties we had at the beginning. I wish we could stay on and take audience questions, and I mean, we could talk about this for hours. But I'm really glad we ended on a kind of a productive note, because it's easy to kind of lose hope and feel like all our efforts are kind of going nowhere. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, apologies for the chaos at the start of the event. Tech difficulties happen, but I'm glad we could keep this going. This event was recorded. It's going to be posted online. And just before we sign up, just a reminder that these policy labs are a crowdfunded program of Ashabaka. I'm posting our website in the chat, and any donations to our organization is extremely helpful. It goes a long way. And anyways, thank you all for joining us again. Thank you to Hueda and Ben for speaking, and we'll catch you at our next event next month.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tarek.
Thank you.